In a small, quiet town surrounded by green fields and gentle hills, there lived a woman named Sarah. She was an ordinary person, someone you might pass on the street without giving a second glance. Her clothes were simple, often faded jeans and plain shirts, and her handbag, though worn out with frayed edges, held everything she needed for the day. Sarah wasn't rich or famous. She didn't own expensive things or live in a grand house. But what she lacked in material wealth she made up for with kindness, humility, and a heart full of dreams. Sarah worked as a cashier at the local grocery store. Every morning, she would rise early, tie her hair into a neat ponytail, and walk to work. The store wasn't fancy. It sold basic items like bread, milk, and vegetables, but it was the center of activity for many families in the town. People came not just to shop, but to chat, share stories, and catch up on gossip. Sarah loved this part of her job. She enjoyed listening to customers talk about their lives, offering a warm smile or a kind word when they seemed down. Though she earned just enough to get by, she found joy in the little things, helping someone find a product, sharing laughter with coworkers, or enjoying a hot cup of tea during her break. Her husband, Mark, was equally unassuming. He worked as a mechanic at a garage on the outskirts of town. His hands were always covered in grease, his clothes stained with oil, but he took pride in his work. Cars were his passion, and he could fix almost anything, from old trucks that sputtered and coughed to sleek sedans with mysterious engine problems. Despite his skill, Mark never charged too much. He believed in fairness and honesty, qualities that had earned him the trust of everyone in the community. Together, Sarah and Mark shared a modest life filled with love, respect, and mutual support. Though they didn't have much, they dreamed big. Late at night, after dinner, they would sit together on their creaky wooden chairs, imagining what their future might look like. Sometimes they talked about traveling to faraway places they'd only seen in magazines. Other times they fantasized about owning something extraordinary, a beautiful home perhaps, or even a luxurious car. These conversations were lighthearted and fun, a way for them to escape the monotony of daily life. Yet deep down, neither of them truly expected these dreams to come true. They were content with what they had: each other. One Saturday morning, however, Sarah decided to do something different. For weeks, she'd been thinking about visiting the nearby car dealership. It wasn't because she wanted to buy anything. She knew such luxuries were beyond her reach, but because she loved looking at cars. There was something magical about stepping into a showroom filled with shiny vehicles, each one gleaming under bright lights. To Sarah, it felt like entering a world far removed from her own, a place where possibilities seemed endless. That morning, after finishing her shift at the grocery store, Sarah changed into her cleanest outfit and set off toward the dealership. As she approached the building, her heart began to race with excitement. Through the large glass windows, she could see rows of gleaming cars, sleek sedans, sporty convertibles, and powerful SUVs. Each vehicle looked more impressive than the last, and Sarah couldn't wait to step inside and take a closer look. But as soon as she entered the showroom, she realized she didn't belong there. The atmosphere was completely different from what she was used to. Everything sparkled: the floors, the walls, even the salespeople's perfectly ironed suits. Customers wandered around casually, dressed in designer outfits and carrying expensive bags. Sarah felt out of place, like a fish swimming in unfamiliar waters. Still, she tried to ignore her discomfort and focus on the cars. She moved slowly, from one display to another, marveling at their beauty and imagining what it would feel like to drive such a masterpiece. It wasn't long before a salesman noticed her. He was tall and well-dressed, with a confident stride that made him stand out. When he approached Sarah, his expression was polite but distant. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone clipped and professional. "No, thank you," Sarah replied softly, clutching her handbag tightly. "I'm just browsing." The man nodded curtly and walked away, muttering something under his breath that Sarah couldn't quite hear. She tried to shake off the awkwardness and continued exploring, losing herself in the allure of the cars. As she leaned closer to examine a particularly stunning model, Disaster struck. In her excitement, Sarah accidentally brushed against the car's glossy surface, leaving behind a faint smudge. Horrified, she quickly pulled out a tissue to wipe it clean. But it was too late. The same salesman who had spoken to her earlier stormed over, his face red with anger. "What are you doing?" he barked loudly, drawing stares from nearby customers. "This isn't some roadside junkyard. If you can't afford anything here, maybe you should leave." Sarah froze, her cheeks burning with shame. She mumbled an apology, tears welling up in her eyes, and hurried out of the dealership as fast as she could. Once outside, she paused for a moment, trying to catch her breath. The humiliation stung deeply, but she reminded herself that it didn't matter. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was just looking like anyone else. Still, the memory of the salesman's harsh words lingered, replaying in her mind long after she returned home. That evening, as Sarah recounted the incident to Mark, her voice trembled with emotion. She described how unwelcome she'd felt, how unfairly she'd been treated. Mark listened silently, his jaw tightening with every word. Though he rarely showed anger, Sarah could see the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. And as they sat together in their cozy living room, both of them knew that this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. That night, as Sarah finished telling her story, Mark sat quietly on the edge of their worn-out couch. His hands were clenched into fists, his knuckles white from the pressure. Though he said nothing, his silence spoke volumes. Sarah could see the anger simmering in his eyes, though it wasn't directed at her. It was for the people who had treated her so poorly. To Mark, Sarah was more than just his wife. She was his partner, his best friend, and the person who made his life worth living. And no one, not even some arrogant car salesman, had the right to make her feel small. The next morning, Mark woke up earlier than usual. He kissed Sarah gently on the forehead before heading out, leaving her puzzled but grateful for his quiet strength. She didn't know what he planned to do, but she trusted him completely. Mark was not a man of grand gestures or flashy displays, but when it came to protecting those he loved, he was unstoppable. As he drove to work, his mind raced with ideas. By the time he reached his garage, he had already made a decision. Mark spent the first half of his day doing what he did best, fixing cars. He worked tirelessly, his hands moving quickly over engines and tires, his focus unwavering. But as soon as the lunch break arrived, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. On the other end of the line was Mr. Thompson, a wealthy businessman whose fleet of luxury vehicles Mark had serviced for years. Over time, their relationship had grown beyond that of client and mechanic. They had become friends. After exchanging pleasantries, Mark got straight to the point. "Mr. Thompson, I need a favor," Mark said firmly, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "A favor?" "Of course, Mark. What is it?" Mr. Thompson replied, curiosity evident in his tone. "I need to borrow your Rolls-Royce Phantom, the silver one, just for a day or two." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Borrowing a Rolls-Royce was no small request, especially since it was one of the most luxurious cars in existence. But Mr. Thompson trusted Mark implicitly. "Sure thing." "Mark, why do you need it?" he asked casually. "It's personal," Mark replied without hesitation. "But I promise you won't regret lending it to me." True to his word, Mr. Thompson arranged for the car to be delivered to Mark's garage later that afternoon. When the sleek vehicle pulled into the driveway, Mark couldn't help but marvel at its beauty. The Rolls-Royce Phantom was a masterpiece, a symbol of wealth, elegance, and power. Its polished silver body gleamed under the sunlight, reflecting every detail with perfect clarity. Even the sound of its engine seemed to whisper luxury. Mark ran his fingers along its smooth surface, feeling both awe and determination. This car would serve a purpose far greater than mere transportation. After inspecting the vehicle thoroughly, Mark spent the rest of the day preparing for what lay ahead. He cleaned himself up, changing into his cleanest shirt and trousers. Though he wasn't accustomed to dressing formally, he wanted to look presentable for what he had planned. As evening approached, he returned home, where Sarah greeted him with a warm hug. She noticed the change in his demeanor. He seemed calmer, more resolved, but she didn't press him for details. Instead, they shared a quiet dinner together, talking about mundane things like the weather and their plans for the weekend. The following morning, Mark woke up early once again. This time, however, he didn't head straight to work. Instead, he climbed into the Rolls-Royce and began driving toward the dealership where Sarah had been humiliated. With each mile, his resolve grew stronger. He imagined the look on the faces of the salespeople when they saw him step out of such an extravagant car. More importantly, he pictured the satisfaction of standing up for Sarah and teaching those snobbish individuals a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. When Mark arrived at the dealership, he parked the Rolls-Royce directly in front of the entrance, ensuring it caught everyone's attention. Heads turned instantly as employees and customers alike stopped to admire the stunning vehicle. Salespeople rushed forward, eager to assist this potential high-profile customer. One of them, a young man in a sharp suit, approached Mark with a wide smile. "Good morning, sir," the salesman greeted enthusiastically. "Welcome to our showroom. How may we assist you today?" Mark smiled politely but kept his expression neutral. "I'm looking for someone," he said calmly. "A woman who visited here yesterday. She was treated quite rudely, I hear." Confusion rippled through the group. No one seemed to know whom he was referring to until the same salesman who had insulted Sarah emerged from behind a display car. Recognition flashed across his face as he realized who Mark was talking about. "Oh, you mean her?" The salesman stammered nervously, his confidence crumbling under Mark's piercing gaze. "Yes," Mark confirmed, his voice now sharp and authoritative. "That's exactly who I mean." Without waiting for an invitation, Mark launched into Sarah's story. He recounted how she had entered the dealership simply to browse, how she had been belittled and mocked for not fitting into their world of wealth and privilege. He described the moment when the salesman had yelled at her, calling the showroom a place unsuitable for someone like her. As Mark spoke, the room fell silent. The arrogance that had once defined the sales team dissolved into shame and embarrassment. The manager appeared moments later, visibly flustered. He apologized profusely, promising disciplinary action against the offending employee. But Mark wasn't satisfied yet. He wanted to ensure that this incident served as a lesson, not just for the dealership staff but for anyone who thought less of others based on appearances. "Let me tell you something," Mark said, addressing the entire group. "You might think expensive cars or fancy suits define a person's worth, but let me assure you they don't. My wife, the woman you dismissed so carelessly, is worth 10 times more than any of these vehicles combined. She's kind, hardworking, and deserves respect regardless of what she wears or drives." His words struck a chord, leaving many of the employees visibly moved. Some nodded in agreement, while others avoided eye contact altogether. The manager, desperate to salvage the dealership's reputation, offered Mark a significant discount on any purchase he wished to make. But Mark shook his head firmly. "I'm not here to buy anything," he stated. "I'm here to remind you that treating people with dignity costs nothing, and failing to do so can cost you everything." With that, he climbed back into the Rolls-Royce and drove away, leaving behind a stunned audience. As he navigated the familiar roads back home, Mark felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. He hadn't sought revenge or recognition. All he had wanted was justice for Sarah. And in that moment, he knew he had succeeded. Later that evening, Mark returned the Rolls-Royce to Mr. Thompson, thanking him profusely for his generosity. Back at home, Sarah greeted him with a mixture of pride and curiosity. Over dinner, Mark recounted the entire day, detailing every moment, from the awestruck reactions of the salespeople to the heartfelt apology from the manager. Sarah listened, quietly, her cheeks flushing with both pride and embarrassment. "You didn't have to go through all that trouble," she murmured finally. "Yes, I did," Mark replied firmly, "because you deserve better. And if anyone ever tries to make you feel small again, they'll have to answer to me." Though Sarah never developed a taste for luxury cars, she cherished the memory of that day forever. For her, it wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about love. Love that stood up, spoke out, and reminded the world that true value lies not in possessions, but in character. And in their quiet little home, surrounded by laughter and warmth, Sarah and Mark knew they already had everything they truly needed. The next morning, Mark woke up with a sense of purpose that hadn't left him since the previous night. He had replayed the plan in his mind countless times, how he would drive the Rolls-Royce to the dealership, confront those who had wronged Sarah, and ensure they understood the gravity of their actions. It wasn't just about making them apologize, it was about teaching them a lesson they wouldn't forget. Respect and dignity weren't privileges reserved for the wealthy. They were rights everyone deserved, regardless of appearance or background. Turba. Finishing a quick breakfast, Mark gave Sarah a reassuring smile. "I'll be back soon," he said simply, not wanting to reveal too much. Sarah nodded, sensing that something significant was about to happen, but choosing to trust him completely. She watched as he walked out the door, the faint scent of determination lingering behind him. Mark climbed into the Rolls-Royce Phantom, adjusting the seat and gripping the steering wheel firmly. The car roared to life with a smooth hum, its engine purring like a content lion. As he drove through the quiet streets of their small town, heads turned. People stopped mid-conversation to stare at the sleek silver vehicle gliding past them. In a place where most folks drove old sedans or pickup trucks, the sight of a Rolls-Royce was nothing short of extraordinary. Mark ignored the curious glances and kept his focus on the road ahead. When he reached the dealership, he parked the car right in front of the entrance, ensuring it was impossible to miss. Its polished surface gleamed under the bright morning sun, drawing attention from everyone inside. Customers paused mid-browse, salespeople abandoned their conversations, and even the manager peeked out of his office window. Within moments, a crowd began to gather around the magnificent vehicle. Mark stepped out of the car slowly, taking his time to straighten his shirt and adjust his posture. He knew how important first impressions were, especially in a place like this. Standing tall, he exuded confidence, not arrogance, but a quiet assurance that commanded respect. His eyes scanned the room, locking onto the faces of the salespeople who now rushed toward him. "Good morning, sir," one of the younger salesmen greeted enthusiastically, his tone dripping with eagerness. "Welcome to our showroom. How may we assist you today?" Mark smiled politely but didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let his gaze linger on each person before speaking. "I'm looking for someone," he said finally, his voice calm yet firm. "A woman who visited here yesterday. She was treated quite rudely, I hear." Confusion rippled through the group. Some exchanged nervous glances while others shifted uncomfortably. No one seemed willing to admit involvement until the same salesman who had insulted Sarah emerged from behind a display car. Recognition flashed across his face as he realized why Mark was there. "Oh, you mean her?" the salesman stammered, nervously, his earlier bravado replaced by fear. "Yes," Mark confirmed, his voice sharp enough to cut through the tension in the air. "That's exactly who I mean." Without waiting for an invitation, Mark launched into Sarah's story. He recounted how she had entered the dealership simply to browse, how she had been mocked and belittled for not fitting into their world of wealth and privilege. He described the moment when the salesman had yelled at her, calling the showroom a place unsuitable for someone like her. As Mark spoke, the room fell silent. The arrogance that had once defined the sales team dissolved into shame and embarrassment. The manager appeared moments later, visibly flustered. He recognized the Rolls-Royce instantly. It was the kind of car only the wealthiest clients owned. Realizing the potential damage to the dealership's reputation, he rushed forward, extending his hand toward Mark. "Sir, please allow me to apologize on behalf of my staff," the manager said hurriedly, his voice trembling slightly. "We take customer service very seriously, and I assure you this behavior is unacceptable. We will take immediate action against the employee responsible." Mark listened carefully, his expression unreadable. Though the apology sounded sincere, he wasn't satisfied yet. He wanted more than words, he wanted accountability. Turning to face the entire group, he addressed them directly. "Let me tell you something," Mark began, his tone commanding yet measured. You might think expensive cars or fancy suits define a person's worth, but let me assure you, they don't. My wife, the woman you dismissed so carelessly, is worth 10 times more than any of these vehicles combined. She's kind, hardworking, and deserves respect, regardless of what she wears or drives. His words struck a chord, leaving many of the employees visibly moved. Some nodded in agreement, while others avoided eye contact altogether. The manager, desperate to salvage the dealership's reputation, offered Mark a significant discount on any purchase he wished to make. But Mark shook his head firmly. "I'm not here to buy anything," he stated. "I'm here to remind you that treating people with dignity costs nothing, and failing to do so can cost you everything." With that, he climbed back into the Rolls-Royce and drove away, leaving behind a stunned audience. As he navigated the familiar roads back home, Mark felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. He hadn't sought revenge or recognition. All he had wanted was justice for Sarah, and in that moment he knew he had succeeded. The ripple effect. Word of Mark's bold move spread quickly throughout the town. By lunchtime, nearly everyone had heard about the mysterious man in the Rolls-Royce who had confronted the dealership staff. Details of the incident were exaggerated with each retelling. Some claimed Mark had threatened legal action, while others insisted he had bought the entire showroom just to shut it down. While none of these rumors were true, they added to the legend of Mark and Sarah, turning them into local heroes. People admired their courage and mutual devotion, often stopping them on the street to express admiration. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, approached Sarah during her grocery shift. "Your husband did a wonderful thing," she said warmly. "He reminded us all that kindness and respect matter more than money or status." Sarah blushed, unsure of what to say. She hadn't expected such attention, but she appreciated the sentiment. At the dealership, the impact of Mark's visit was profound. The manager called an emergency meeting with all staff members, emphasizing the importance of treating every customer equally. A new policy was implemented requiring employees to attend monthly training sessions on customer service and inclusivity. Posters were hung in the showroom reminding everyone that every customer matters. Even the offending salesman, whose name was Greg, was suspended for 2 weeks without pay, a punishment that sent a clear message to the rest of the team. Greg, the experience was humbling. He had always prided himself on his ability to identify high-value customers, believing that success came from catering exclusively to the wealthy. But after meeting Mark and hearing his powerful words, Greg began to see things differently. During his suspension, he took time to reflect on his behavior and realized how misguided he had been. When he returned to work, he made a conscious effort to treat everyone with respect, no matter their appearance or background. A quiet homecoming. Later that evening, Mark returned the Rolls-Royce to Mr. Thompson, thanking him profusely for his generosity. Back at home, Sarah greeted him with a mixture of pride and curiosity. Over dinner, Mark recounted the entire day, detailing every moment, from the awestruck reactions of the salespeople to the heartfelt apology from the manager. Sarah listened quietly, her cheeks flushing with both pride and embarrassment. "You didn't have to go through all that trouble," she murmured finally. "Yes, I did," Mark replied firmly. "Because you deserve better. And if anyone ever tries to make you feel small again, they'll have to answer to me." Though Sarah never developed a taste for luxury cars, she cherished the memory of that day forever. For her, it wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about love. Love that stood up, spoke out, and reminded the world that true value lies not in possessions but in character. And in their quiet little home, surrounded by laughter and warmth, Sarah and Mark knew they already had everything they truly needed. Mark had always been a man of few words, preferring actions over speeches. But as he stood in the middle of the dealership showroom surrounded by shocked faces, he realized that sometimes words carried more weight than anything else. His voice echoed through the polished space, cutting through the tension like a knife. The staff members, who moments earlier had been scrambling to appear professional, now stood frozen, their eyes glued to him. For the first time in their lives, they were forced to confront the reality of how they treated people, not just wealthy customers, but ordinary individuals like Sarah. After delivering his powerful speech about respect and dignity, Mark turned to the manager, whose face was pale with anxiety. "I'm not here for discounts or apologies," Mark said firmly. "What I want is accountability. I want every single person working here to understand that treating someone poorly because of how they look or what they wear isn't just wrong, it's unacceptable. And if you don't fix this culture, your business will suffer far worse than losing one customer." The manager nodded vigorously, sweat forming on his forehead. He knew Mark wasn't bluffing. The Rolls-Royce parked outside was proof enough that Mark wasn't someone to take lightly. More importantly, Mark's demeanor, calm yet commanding, left no room for doubt. This wasn't just a disgruntled husband seeking revenge, it was a man determined to make a difference. To ensure his message stuck, Mark requested that all employees gather for a brief meeting. Reluctantly, the manager agreed, instructing his staff to form a circle around Mark. Standing tall beside the gleaming Rolls-Royce, Mark addressed them directly. His tone softened slightly, but his words remained sharp and clear. "Let me tell you something," he began, looking each employee in the eye. "You work in a place where dreams are sold. People come here hoping to buy not just a car, but a piece of happiness, a symbol of hard work paying off. They trust you to guide them, to treat them fairly. When you disrespect someone like my wife, you destroy that trust. You turn this showroom into a place where fear and judgment replace kindness and professionalism." He paused for effect, letting his words sink in. Some employees shifted uncomfortably while others stared at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. A young woman near the back wiped away tears, clearly affected by his words. Mark continued, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "My wife works hard every day. She supports our family, cares for others, and brings light into people's lives. She doesn't need fancy clothes or expensive cars to prove her worth. What she deserves, and what everyone deserves, is respect. Respect costs nothing. Yet, failing to give it can cost you everything. Your reputation, your relationships, and even your humanity." When he finished speaking, there was complete silence. No one dared to move or speak. The weight of Mark's words hung heavy in the air, forcing each person to reflect on their own behavior. The manager stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice trembling. "We'll make sure this never happens again. Please believe us when we say we're truly sorry." Mark nodded, satisfied that his point had been made. He didn't need empty promises or hollow gestures. He needed change. As he climbed back into the Rolls-Royce and drove away, leaving behind a stunned audience, he felt a sense of fulfillment wash over him. It wasn't about proving a point or seeking revenge. It was about standing up for what was right. And in doing so, he hoped he had planted a seed of understanding that would grow within the hearts of those who had wronged Sarah. A town transformed. News of Mark's bold move spread like wildfire throughout the small town. By evening, nearly everyone had heard about the mysterious man in the Rolls-Royce who had confronted the dealership staff. Details of the incident were exaggerated with each retelling. Some claimed Mark had threatened legal action, while others insisted he had bought the entire showroom just to shut it down. While none of these rumors were true, they added to the legend of Mark and Sarah, turning them into local heroes. People admired their courage and mutual devotion, often stopping them on the street to express admiration. Mrs. Peterson, an elderly neighbor, approached Sarah during her grocery shift. "Your husband did a wonderful thing," she said warmly. "He reminded us all that kindness and respect matter more than money or status." Sarah blushed, unsure of what to say. She hadn't expected such attention, but she appreciated the sentiment. At the dealership, the impact of Mark's visit was profound. The manager called an emergency meeting with all staff members, emphasizing the importance of treating every customer equally. A new policy was implemented requiring employees to attend monthly training sessions on customer service and inclusivity. Posters were hung in the showroom, reminding everyone that every customer matters. Even the offending salesman, Greg, was suspended for 2 weeks without pay, a punishment that sent a clear message to the rest of the team. For Greg, the experience was humbling. He had always prided himself on his ability to identify high-value customers, believing that success came from catering exclusively to the wealthy. But after meeting Mark and hearing his powerful words, Greg began to see things differently. During his suspension, he took time to reflect on his behavior and realized how misguided he had been. When he returned to work, he made a conscious effort to treat everyone with respect, no matter their appearance or background. Other employees followed suit. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere at the dealership began to shift. Customers noticed the change immediately. Where once they had felt intimidated or judged, they now felt welcomed and valued. Sales increased as word spread about the improved service, and the dealership's reputation soared. What started as a single act of defiance by Mark had transformed an entire workplace culture. A quiet evening at home. Later that evening, Mark returned the Rolls-Royce to Mr. Thompson, thanking him profusely for his generosity. On the drive home, he couldn't help but smile. Not because of the attention or praise he had received, but because he had done something meaningful. He had stood up for Sarah, the woman he loved more than anything in the world, and shown her and everyone else that true value lies not in material possessions, but in character. Back at home, Sarah greeted him with a warm hug. Over dinner, Mark recounted the events of the day, detailing every moment, from the awestruck reactions of the salespeople to the heartfelt apology from the manager. Sarah listened quietly, her cheeks flushing with both pride and embarrassment. "You didn't have to go through all that trouble," she murmured finally. "Yes, I did," Mark replied firmly, "because you deserve better. And if anyone ever tries to make you feel small again, they'll have to answer to me." Sarah smiled softly, her heart swelling with gratitude. She knew Mark wasn't one for grand gestures, but this act of love meant more to her than any expensive gift ever could. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about standing together, supporting each other, and reminding the world that true wealth comes from kindness, humility, and respect. As they sat together in their cozy living room later that night, sharing laughter and stories, Sarah and Mark felt a deep sense of contentment. They may not have owned a luxurious home or driven a fancy car, but they had something far greater, a bond built on love, trust, and unwavering support. Their quiet little corner of the world. They knew they already had everything they truly needed. The days following Mark's visit to the dealership brought a wave of change, not just for the staff at the showroom, but for the entire town. Word of Mark's bold actions spread far and wide, becoming the talk of every household. People admired his courage and the way he had stood up for Sarah, turning what could have been a personal grievance into a lesson for everyone. The story resonated deeply with many because it highlighted values that often got overlooked in a world obsessed with appearances, kindness, respect, and humility. At the dealership, the transformation was palpable. Employees who once judged customers based on their clothes or demeanor now greeted everyone warmly, regardless of how they looked. Salespeople no longer whispered snide remarks behind closed doors. Instead, they focused on providing genuine assistance. Even Greg, the salesman who had insulted Sarah, became one of the most improved members of the team. After his suspension, he returned with a renewed perspective, determined to make amends for his past behavior. His colleagues noticed the effort he put into treating every customer with care, and soon he earned their respect back. The manager kept his promise to implement lasting changes. Monthly training sessions were held to remind employees about the importance of inclusivity and empathy. Posters with messages like "Respect every customer" adorned the walls, serving as constant reminders of the new standards. Slowly but surely, the dealership evolved from a place known for its elitism to one celebrated for its warmth and professionalism. Customers began returning, not just for the cars, but for the experience. What Mark had started had sparked a chain reaction, proving that small acts of courage could lead to big transformations. a quiet pride. For Sarah, life returned to normal, or so it seemed on the surface. She went back to her routine at the grocery store, greeting regulars with her usual smile and helping them find items on the shelves. But something inside her had shifted. Before the incident, she had often doubted herself, wondering if perhaps she didn't belong in certain places or situations. Now, however, she carried an invisible shield of confidence, knowing that Mark believed in her worth, and that others had learned to see it too. Customers at the store noticed the subtle change in her demeanor. She wasn't louder or flashier. Rather, there was a quiet strength about her, a sense of self-assurance that inspired those around her. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly neighbor who had praised Mark earlier, stopped by again one afternoon. This time she spoke directly to Sarah. "You, no," Mrs. Peterson said thoughtfully, leaning against the counter. "Your husband did more than stand up for you. He reminded all of us that we shouldn't let anyone define our value. You're a wonderful person, Sarah, and don't ever forget that." Sarah blushed, touched by the compliment. "Thank you," she replied softly. "But I think it's Mark who deserves the credit. He's always been my rock." Mrs. Peterson chuckled. "Maybe so, but rocks don't shine unless they're polished, and you've clearly done a fine job of bringing out the best in him too." Sarah smiled, realizing how true those words were. Their marriage wasn't built on grand gestures or extravagant displays. It was rooted in mutual support, understanding, and love. Together they had created a partnership where both felt valued and respected, not just by each other but by the world around them. A new perspective. As weeks turned into months, the effects of Mark's actions rippled outward, touching lives beyond the dealership. Neighbors started treating each other with greater kindness, remembering the lesson Mark had taught, that wealth and status don't determine someone's worth. At school, teachers used the story to illustrate the importance of empathy during assemblies. Parents shared it with their children, teaching them that respect should be given freely, not earned through material possessions. Even strangers passing through town heard snippets of the tale. One day, a traveler stopped at the local cafe to grab a cup of coffee. As he waited in line, he overheard two patrons discussing Mark and Sarah. Intrigued, he asked for details. By the time he left the cafe, he couldn't stop thinking about the couple and their simple yet profound message. When he returned home, he recounted the story to his family, spreading its influence even further. Mark himself remained humble despite the attention. To him, none of this was about fame or recognition. It was about doing what was right. He continued working at the garage, fixing cars with the same dedication and honesty that had earned him the trust of the community. Occasionally, people would approach him to thank him for inspiring them, but he brushed off the praise with a modest smile. "It wasn't me," he'd say. "It was Sarah. All I did was remind people of what they already knew deep down." An enduring legacy. Months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Mark and Sarah sat together on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fallen leaves, and the sky glowed with hues of orange and pink. They sipped hot tea from chipped mugs, content in each other's company. "Do you ever think about that day?" Sarah asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "All the time," Mark admitted, his voice soft. "Not because of what happened, but because of what it meant. It reminded me how lucky I am to have you." Sarah laughed lightly, nudging him playfully. "You're such a sap sometimes." "Well, it's true," Mark replied, grinning. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." They sat quietly for a while, reflecting on everything that had transpired since that fateful day at the dealership. Neither of them had expected their lives to change so dramatically, but they were grateful for the lessons they had learned and the impact they had made. In the end, it wasn't the Rolls-Royce or the confrontation itself that mattered most. It was the reminder that true value lies within, a truth that transcended wealth, status, or appearances. For Mark and Sarah, life remained simple and unassuming, just the way they liked it. Yet within that simplicity lay a richness few could match, a love strong enough to challenge injustice, a bond deep enough to inspire others, and a legacy destined to endure long after the headlines faded. And so, in their quiet little corner of the world, surrounded by laughter, warmth, and unwavering devotion, Mark and Sarah knew they already had everything they truly needed.